You might think the story of the U.S. Constitution is this grand tale of immediate victory, right? Well, not exactly. It's actually a story about a massive do-over, a second chance that came about only because America's first shot at a government was a complete and utter disaster. It's a kind of wild question, isn't it? But it gets right to the heart of our story. Because after winning independence, the 13 states were so terrified of a powerful central government, like the one they had just overthrown, they ended up creating something that was almost guaranteed to fall apart. So let's look at this first attempt. This was supposed to be America's original rulebook, but it turned out to be less a blueprint for a nation and more of a fragile pact between a bunch of rivals. That first document was called the Articles of Confederation. And get this, the text itself described the Union as a firm league of friendship. Think about that for a second. A league of friendship. That doesn't sound like one country, does it? It was basically 13 independent states agreeing to hang out. The vast majority of power stayed with them, leaving the central government incredibly weak. And when I say weak, I mean powerless. There was no president to lead. There were no federal courts to settle fights between states. And crucially, the government couldn't tax anyone. If it needed money, it literally had to go hat in hand and ask the states for a donation. You could imagine how well that worked out.
So, what happens when a government has no real power and absolutely no money? The answer is chaos, and things got bad really fast.
This quote from George Washington just captures the mood perfectly. You could feel the frustration and the fear that was spreading among the nation's leaders. The country was falling apart at the seams. It was acting like 13 separate little nations, not one united one. And Washington was asking, who's going to take us seriously on the world stage? The downward spiral was quick. You had states cutting their own separate deals with other countries. They started printing their own money, which made trade an absolute nightmare. But the final straw, the real breaking point, came in 1786 with Shays' Rebellion. A group of angry, indebted farmers rose up, and the national government was totally powerless to stop it. That was the alarm bell that proved to everyone the system had failed. So the leaders knew something had to change, and fast. They called for a meeting in Philadelphia in 1787, and the original plan was just to revise the Articles. But they pretty quickly realized they needed to just throw the whole thing out and start from scratch. But starting over was not easy. The biggest fight, right out of the gate, was over representation. The large states, like Virginia, wanted representation in Congress to be based on population. More people, more power. Makes sense. But the small states, like New Jersey, were terrified of getting completely overpowered. They wanted every state to have an equal vote. For a minute there, it really seemed like this disagreement was going to blow up the entire convention. But then they found a breakthrough. It's known today as the Great Compromise, and it's a fantastic piece of political problem solving. They created a legislature with two houses, what we call a bicameral legislature. In the House of Representatives, representation would be based on population. That made the big states happy. And in the Senate, every single state would get two senators, regardless of its size. That protected the small states. It was truly the deal that saved the Constitution. Now, there was another deeply difficult compromise that had to be made, and this one was over the issue of slavery. Southern states wanted to count enslaved people as part of their population to get more power in Congress. Northern states opposed this. The result was the infamous Three-Fifths Compromise, a dark, terrible bargain that would have lasting and tragic consequences for the nation. Okay, so with the major compromises hashed out, the delegates could finally lay out the new blueprint for the American government, and the whole thing was built on a separation of powers. First up, you have the legislative branch, which is Congress. Their job is to make the laws. This is the House and Senate that were born out of that great compromise, and they're designed to represent both the people directly and the states. Next, you've got the executive branch, led by the president. Their job is to carry out the laws that Congress makes. Remember how the old government had no leader at all? Well, this was the fix, a single person to provide direction and see that the laws were actually enforced. And finally, Article 3 sets up the judicial branch. Their job is to interpret the laws. Under the Articles of Confederation, there were no federal courts, so when states had a beef with each other, there was no referee. The Supreme Court was created to be that ultimate arbiter. So together, these three branches were designed to be co-equal, each one checking the power of the others to make sure no one part of the government ever got too strong. But just writing the Constitution was only half the battle.
Now they had to convince the states to actually approve it, and a whole new fight was about to begin. Two sides formed pretty quickly. On one side, you had the Federalists. They supported the new Constitution, arguing that the country needed a strong central government just to survive. On the other side were the Anti-Federalists. They were scared. They thought this new government was way too powerful and would crush the rights of individuals. Their biggest demand? A list of protected rights. And this was not just a friendly debate. The Constitution wouldn't become law unless 9 of the 13 states ratified it. That's a supermajority. This was an incredibly high bar, and for a long, long time, the outcome was anything but certain. So, to win over those skeptical states, the Federalists made a critical promise. They said, ratify the Constitution now, and we promise the very first thing the new Congress will do is out a Bill of Rights. That promise was the final compromise that got the Constitution over the finish line. It guaranteed fundamental freedoms like speech, religion, and the press. When you step back and look at it, from the Greek Compromise to the Bill of Rights, the Constitution is really a testament to finding a middle ground. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, and it left a lot of issues unresolved. Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Which of these foundational compromises about the balance of power between the states, the government, and the people are we still grappling with in our debates today?